Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Thursday, April 25th, 2024. Whew, slow down to get that right. Lots going on today. Time to get ready for, well, all sorts of things. All kinds of courtroom antics happening today. Trump back on trial again in New York. I mean, he was on trial yesterday in New York, too, but there was a break in proceedings for the Wednesday day off in Judge Merchan's courtroom. But back to, I don't know what the hell's going on today. I think, is David Pecker still on the stand? I don't know. I keep hearing talk about it, and I'm not following things closely enough to know exactly who's on the stand today. But maybe Greg Dworkin is. He tends to follow things rather closely. So we'll take a look at what's going on there at the trial level. At the height of the appellate level, though, SCOTUS arguments today. Supreme Court is actually, they're going to waste everybody's time, I guess. Either, somebody's time is going to be wasted here. Either their own time, as they consider Trump's argument, and really the Republican Party's argument, that Republican presidents, anyway, ought to be immune from absolutely every sort of crime, and that a president can't do his, or her, thank you, job at all, according to Trump's argument. You cannot do the job of the presidency without absolute immunity from all criminal and probably also civil, and he would imagine, liability forever for anything that they ever did, whether they were president at the time or not, whether they think they're president at the time or not, whether they claim they're president at the time or not. Very interesting argument. So you would think it would be a waste of time for the 9 justices to sit and listen to this thing. Every other court that has treated the subject has said, no, that's ridiculous. We don't have anything like that. Our system of law has never contemplated anything even approaching that sort of theory. But you go ahead. You sit and judge whether or not maybe everyone has been wrong. So someone's getting their time wasted today, whether it's the 9 justices, and you know they're not going to stand for it being them, right? Or all of us who have ever studied the law or the Constitution in general or watched Schoolhouse Rock or repeated that Superman stood for truth, justice, and the American way. Whatever it might be. Anyway, meantime, they are also cracking heads at universities all over the country as protesters come out. Now, people, of course, are coming out to protest the fact that the protests elsewhere are being forcibly suppressed. So it's having that, I guess, it's something like analogous to the Streisand effect here, I guess. There are universities where there were no pro-Palestinian encampments anyway, that now are saying, well, we should try it here too, either in protest of what's happening at the other universities or just to test whether or not our university administration is as totalitarian as these other ones seem to be. They're overreacting. Things are actually, I think, we're getting better. Greg mentioned that talks were ongoing in Colombia, which was the exemplar of all of these things. Speaker Johnson showed up there yesterday to try to make things worse, but so far he hasn't fanned the flames any. But other universities have taken up the same protest, and now at the University of Texas in Austin, they had a similar crackdown where, of course, the governor believes that, thinks he has the authoritarian power to put these protests down specifically because of the viewpoint they're expressing, which is called viewpoint discrimination, and the old Supreme Court used to think was bad, but now it's cool. Anyway, I just thought there were 2 interesting parallels going on here. If you are at all outraged that the former president of the United States, allegedly, Donald Trump, is about to argue, maybe win in front of the Supreme Court on the argument that presidents ought to have complete and utter immunity from everything so that they can do whatever they need to do to, quote unquote, get the job done, even if that's surrender to Russia. If that bothers you, and you are, like, say, me, still generally favorably inclined to Israel and Israelis, even though you're embarrassed and disgusted by what's going on in Gaza to some extent, to put it mildly, you will probably, well, you'll find yourself in a similar spot today. It seems odd to me that the premise of cracking down on all of these protests is that any protest that points to a flaw that they see in Israeli policy or conduct as a government is automatically anti-Semitic. I think we all understand the difference between those two things. I think the people pointing the finger and claiming that still understand the difference between those two things, but need that tool. In other words, absolute immunity for Israel. No matter what they do, they're immune from criticism, because if you point and say that thing is not a good idea, that is a bad thing, or even a horrible thing, or even a not so great thing, that is anti-Semitism and cannot be tolerated by, of course, some of the biggest anti-Semites in this country and probably around the world as well. So, it puts you in a difficult logical position. Why should there be absolute immunity for a Republican president? And make no mistake, they never intend to extend that to Democratic presidents. They'll find some way of differentiating, but it makes things tough, right? It's a tough day logically, but you can sort these things out. A president shouldn't have absolute immunity from everything, because there are going to be some places where you're going to need to rein in presidential power just for your own sanity and existence. Similarly, there are going to be places where you are going to need to be able to criticize Israeli conduct of some kind as a government because it's wrong, or at the minimum looks terrible and undermines the cause of maintaining an Israeli government. These sorts of things you have to be able to point to. And it's interesting, where you can point to those things and get away with it is in Israel, which is odd. I don't know why. I mean, I'm wondering, has Netanyahu considered calling the American police and reporting the population of Israel as anti-Semitic? Maybe they'll come and break up the protests against him, calling for his ouster and immediate elections. It's a weird situation we're in, and we can all unite behind remembering, well, if we bend a little bit, maybe we can actually be rid of TFG once and for all if we just put our minds to it, and I think that would be a compromise the rest of the world could accept. Greg Dworkin, good morning. How are you doing? What are you following today?
Hi. All sorts of things.
Okay.
But since you started on it, I thought I would just throw in my 2 cents.
Sure, why not?
It is not anti-Semitic to protest against Israel, plain and simple.
Know? There you go.
But here's the problem.
Oh, no.
There's
always a problem.
If the protesters were protesting against Likud, if they just said Likud is wrong, that Netanyahu's wrong, that Ben-Gvir is wrong, that Likud is the problem, I don't think anybody would have much of an issue with that. But if you say that, they say, no, it's Israel. Well, what does that mean? And that is where it really gets dicey.
Yeah,
so
well, we have that problem.
The organizers of the protests are pro-Hamas, which they are on their websites.
Yes,
this
sometimes
is a problem.
When you see that, it is problem. Hamas is not something to be pro.
Right, pro-Palestinian, absolutely, no problem with that whatsoever.
Yeah,
pro-Hamas, no.
Right, and I know they're supposed to be they're the only existing voice. Well, they're not actually, for one thing, and for another. They are dedicated to things that you are going to, like when you put up signs that say there's rules for your encampment and community, and remember, there's no harm to come to anybody, no one can be threatened. Well, now you're out of alignment with Hamas. Should kick you out.
Right. So
you can't support us.
I step back and look at it and say, not only who is supporting it, but who is against it.
Yeah.
And
it doesn't mean you can't protest.
But I'm looking at this and thinking, okay, I'm not on Elise Stefanik's side. I'm not on Mike Johnson's side.
No.
And so if my instinct was I'm a little leery about this, and then those guys are on the side of cracking down, I'm certainly not on the side of cracking down. But, at the same time, I can't support Hamas. Can't.
No. Well, there's no reason to do that. And look, this is one of those things where I say, all right, I understand what you're doing here. I understand what you're protesting. These are bad things that you're protesting. I understand that you may or may not understand what Hamas is all about. Honestly, got to be maybe I
it's a learning
misunderstand something
it's all
about them as
it's
well.
all good. You and I have had these discussions over the years about Occupy Wall Street, defund the police. There's ways, in my view, that you can make a broader case that gets sympathetic people on your side, and there's a way you can make the case that alienates people. And so I think sometimes these protests are alienating people.
Sometimes.
And I can't
they're doing
come on the
pretty well
side
here.
of Stefanik, so I'm sort of torn like everybody else is with a heart. But at the same time, Hamas, no, that's just an absolute.
Yeah. Well, most of the people, when the people who aren't necessarily occupying or participating in the protests, who are looking around and seeing what's going on, are not checking the website for one thing and say, well, what exactly is their platform and what do they support? Well, okay.
Well, the other side of the coin is civil disobedience is including, okay, I'm going to get arrested, so stop complaining about that. That's part of the deal. If you decide to occupy something that you're not supposed to occupy, it's public space and you're blocking other people from using it, you can expect that you're going to be arrested. You should be treated humanely, appropriately, booked and released. No big deal, no clubs, no tear gas, nothing bad, no violence on either side. That's the way it's supposed to work. When it doesn't work like that, you scratch your head and say somebody's not reading the script.
Yep. And there's been a lot of discussion about the protest tactics. In some places, they've been better, and in
some places they've been worse.
But yeah, a lot of the protest organizers are, in fact, learning from past experience and are instructing their people. And you see them giving warnings as the police close in. Listen, if you're one of those among us who really feels like they can't afford to be arrested, you got to go now. And the rest of us have to be expecting to be arrested here. And a good point made, though, this is because they have studied protest for a long time and come to understand the dynamics of it. But the people who never study the dynamics of protest and change their tactics, apparently the police, who always just say, well, overwhelming force, we change our tactics. There's new products we can use to implement our force. But rarely have they ever looked into, well, how can we do this without having to kill people? They're egged on by people like
Stefanik and Johnson, which gives you a little clue as to what's going on here. But also Eric Adams, who's a Republican, except he calls himself a Democrat. Right.
Well, that guy's got problems of his own.
Altogether. So, listen, most of today's news is about the courts.
Good.
And I'm not even going to start with that.
No.
I'm going to start with something a little wonky, but there's a reason.
I wish there was no reason.
At least I tell myself.
We could feel like, okay, we're very wild and crazy here.
Yep. Split Ticket is one of the newer predictive sites that's sprung up this election, and it's run by a bunch of kids, which is
those
wonky kids.
Are they meddling kids?
No, they're not even meddling kids. They're the kind of kids, the whiz kids that come on and look at data and try to analyze it and make sense of it all.
Okay.
And Laksha Jain is one
weird sort of kid.
And he wrote a really interesting piece in response to Nate Cohen, who was getting upset with poll denialists because there's a bunch of swing state polls that show Trump is ahead. I look at it and say, yeah, they probably do show that. Who cares? They're not necessarily accurate, and they're certainly not necessarily predictive. Let's move on and do something else. We've been talking about this. But Laksha Jain has some really interesting insight about this because two of the people that I follow, him and Adam Carlson, have been fairly critical of Nate, saying, Adam Carlson said, just have the infallible New York Times Siena conduct a N equal 5,000 poll across the battleground states. Why even bother having an election? Because, New York Times is always right. And Nate Cohen got annoyed at that and said, poll denialists are going to drive themselves crazy. And Laksha Jain steps back and looks at it and said, look, in my opinion, in Laksha Jain's opinion, a reason many Democrats are upset is that it feels like we're playing Calvin ball. Dems do well in specials, doesn't matter. Trump does poorly in primaries, like in Pennsylvania, where Nikki Haley protest vote gets a really big number, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Biden does poorly in primaries, half that number protest Biden. Oh, that's a sign of weakness on the left. Biden polls badly? Oh, that's awful. Polls already overshot him in 2020. He has no chance. And Jane is saying, I'm explaining. I'm not saying I agree with these arguments, but it's clear to me that the reason the sentiment on Twitter at least exists is because there's a lot of talk focused around Biden's vulnerabilities in the data world, not much about Trump's. That's why these trials are so important, and that's why I wanted to start with this observation. To this point, it's clear why that talk exists, he writes. You can easily reconcile Biden's polling woes with data, show why the special elections and primaries may provide a false signal. There's valid, counter arguments to this, but I'm just saying. But that also pushes back on every point of Democratic strength, and it isn't helped by the fact that there's a group of pundits revolving around the data analyst, like Peter Baker in the New York Times, who want to jump on Democrats for either not being left-wing enough or too left-wing. It's not the analyst's fault necessarily, but it contributes to why Democrats are mad. So I think it's clear as to why people are angrier than usual about the polls, despite a clean pattern emerging. The columns written at the moment have to explain Trump's polling strength, and doing that involves reconciling polls with the signals that seem good for Biden. And so that means you have to take Biden down in order to make the polls make any sense. And that's why Democrats are so mad. And there's a parallel article, by the way, that I didn't send you, but it just mentions that Biden and the New York Times are feuding. And from Biden's point of view, they're elitists. And from the Times point of view, they're not being realistic in giving us what we want. And what we want is A.G. Sulzberger, the publisher, feels that Biden really isn't legitimate until he talks to the New York Times. And the Biden people are saying, yeah, go take a hike.
Oh, well.
So that's what's going on there.
What's wrong with hiking?
You have the impression that the New York Times is especially hard on Biden. It's true. And they sort of verify it. And they claim there's a reason for it. And it's you didn't give us enough interview garbage, as if they are the arbiters of what's important and who you should be interviewed by.
Well, has he considered going there and saying, well, I'm just happy to be here today. We're taking it one day at a time. And, this is a team effort. And I just want to say...
and the only poll that counts is in November.
Why not just do that? Yeah, go and give a sports interview. All right,
because I'm too busy trying to get Iran and Israel not to attack each other.
Well, who again? Those sound like large concerns.
Right, so that's part of the background here. And therefore, here's another piece in that regard. Signal, Cygnal, another newcomer.
Oh.
Also good. Also WizKids. This is Noah Wyhoff.
Spelling. Yeah, all right, good.
And he's got a nice piece here. Are Democrats in disarray? Well, it depends. See, his point is really simple one.
Yeah.
When you look at the numbers, Trump always gets the same number.
All right.
Sometimes Biden is higher because the Democrats in the polls say, okay, we're uniting behind him. And sometimes Biden is lower because they're not.
Is that disarray?
So the variance in horse race polling right now is essentially completely one-sided depending upon how unified your sample is. The polling needs to happen consistently right up until the very end of the election because there's a lot of Democrats that don't make up their mind until the last minute, and it's whether or not to unite behind their candidate. They often do. So the Democrats wind up doing well and or better than the polls, but you're not going to see it in the polls now because protest votes against Gaza, even though it's number 13 in the list of things that are important to young voters, according to the Harvard IOP, or maybe it's inflation, or maybe it's this or that or something else. It's just that, again, it's still relatively early for polling. And so when you see these variations, how can Biden be ahead by 1 but down by 6? Well, it depends on your Democratic sample, not the Republican sample. It's always the same. The Republican sample is Trump gets 44, 43, 45. And the rest of them are sort of, I'm not sure I'm going to vote for him. I think in the end they won't. And so out there is the question of what about those Haley voters? Will they vote for Biden or will they stay home? They're not voting for Trump. So that's why Trump's problems don't get highlighted by the polls, only the Democratic problems. And that's why Laxo Jain, different piece, different organization, looks at it and says, I get it. I understand why Democrats are so annoyed. If you're doing the analysis and you don't understand what you're seeing, and all you say is, oh, it's obviously a list of Democratic problems, let me give them to you, and that's all you do, you're going to piss off Democrats.
Okay. Well, It's working sometimes, pissing off Democrats. And
it is, because then
the
Democrats step back and say, what's going on here? Look at what's going on in the courts. And you mentioned the Supreme Court.
I did.
You mentioned the New York Court.
Uh-huh.
That's third and fourth important today in the courts.
Yes.
First, Arizona.
Oh, yes, all right.
Arizona grand jury indicts Meadows, Giuliani, other Trump allies for 2020 election interference. The former president is listed as an unindicted co-conspirator.
Why not indict him?
And so when you take a list,
one list
at who is charged in the Arizona 2020 election interference case.
Brand new.
Let me give you some names.
All right.
Okay, Mark Meadows.
What? That guy? All right. Good.
Rudy Giuliani.
Oh, yuck. I hate that guy. All right.
Jenna Ellis.
Oh, well, I was
Boris
thinking
Epshteyn, however he pronounces
my
his
attorney.
name. Okay, and here's my favorite.
Boris.
Mike Roman. Remember Mike Roman?
I do.
He's the guy nobody ever heard of, and we've said might be co-conspirator number 6 for Jack Smith's case, and then he goes ahead and he gets himself indicted in Georgia. Now he's indicted in Arizona.
But so is Boris Epshteyn, so I'm not certain which one of these
exactly.
is number 6.
But the reason that we had Mike Roman up there as a possibility is, he really was involved, it could have been him.
Yeah, and in Arizona, they seem to think his antics rose to the level of indictment. So, okay.
As 2020 campaign director of Election Day, writes the Washington Post, Roman helped coordinate the alternate elector plan with Trump lawyers and top aides. He played a key role in helping to organize the strategy and communicated about the Arizona plan with key Republicans in the state, including then state GOP chair Kelli Ward.
I remember.
Don Lewis on Twitter pulled this January 2022 rant from GOP chair Kelli Ward. Let me quote it. I want to see arrests. I want to see perp walks. I want to see people in jail.
All right.
Well, she got her wish because she's indicted too.
Huzzah. I wonder if she ever spent time chanting, lock her up.
Right, exactly.
All right. I thought it's weird that you refer to yourself in the third person, but you're under arrest.
John Eastman.
Was that the second person?
Right. Also indicted.
Yes.
I mean, when your list is long, when you got 20 people, you're going to see some familiar names. Christina Bobb.
Oh, well.
One American News. Also
terrific.
A lawyer.
Yeah, also the Republican National Committee's Election Integrity Council.
Right. And then a list of other Arizona Republicans like Kelli Ward's husband. Tyler Bauer, Republican National Committeeman from Arizona. Jake Hoffman, Republican State Senator. Anthony Kern, Republican State Senator. Jim Lamon, GOP donor and 2022 U.S. Senate candidate. I thought Mark Fincham was also, well, he may just be an unindicted co-conspirator. It's hard to tell. But that's Arizona.
These people, the last couple names, they were the electors or the fake electors?
Some of them.
I assume.
They either signed paperwork falsely purporting that Trump won.
That's a problem.
That would make them the electors.
Yeah.
The fake electors, which Roman or Eastman, I forget, one of them, advised. Or, no. It was Ken Chesborough who's cooperating. He's an unindicted co-conspirator. He's the one that wrote them and said, stop using the word fake, start calling them alternates.
Okay. I mean.
But he's cooperating.
That's bad. Great.
The cheese has turned.
Throw him off a lower cliff. Okay.
That's Arizona.
Yeah.
That's number 1. Then number 2 in the courts?
Yeah.
Michigan.
Oh, for the same reason?
Also yesterday, Trump is a co-conspirator in Michigan's 2020 false electors plot, state investigators say.
Mm-hmm.
Some of his top aides were co-conspirators in the plot to submit a certificate falsely claiming he won Michigan's 2020 election. An investigator for Attorney General Dana Nessel's office testified Wednesday as new details of the effort to prosecute the alleged scheme took shape in 2 battleground states. So this is a court case going on right now. Howard Schock, special agent for Nessel, said Trump, Meadows, who was Trump's chief of staff, and Giuliani, who is his personal lawyer, are considered unindicted co-conspirators. So they were indicted in Georgia and Arizona, but not Michigan. Schock's comments came the same day. 11 Arizona Republican electors and 7 other Trump allies, including Meadows and Giuliani, were indicted in Arizona. So before you even get to New York, before you even get to the Supreme Court, you got to go through Arizona and Michigan. Now, with this kind of background, with what's happening not just in these cases, but also to the complete disarray of the Republican parties in this state, that's why I go back to Lakshash Jain's point about having Democrats being annoyed, because all you're looking at is the poll numbers and trying to figure out reasons to justify them. Therefore, Biden is weak, and you're ignoring all this other stuff, which is front page news.
Yes.
That'll take us to the break. But boy, is it annoying. I'm one of those annoyed Democrats. How are you not seeing this?
I feel like I am seeing this.
Well, you're hearing it.
Oh, well, that's true. No, but I feel like I'm seeing it. That's how powerful a reaction I'm having to it. I'm having hallucinations along with the auditory experience. I feel it very powerfully.
I should turn the sound down.
Well, I've been running around for months now saying, how is this not considered, by the way, the crime of the century? The idea of forging electoral college votes. Like, what's the point of even having an election if you can just say, why go through the expense?
Was right. This is all part and parcel of the same conspiracy.
Yes. It
That's
is.
why she did what she did in Georgia, however long that takes.
And by the way, for all the people who spent all that time, well, pundits really, oh my gosh, this is her theory of the crime is crazy. She's overreaching. She's out of control. This is the wrong way to go about it. The right way to do it is Jack Smith's way. Well, Arizona just did it the same way. Michigan just did it the same way. Now, they didn't indict Trump, but that's just because he didn't create a nexus with them.
Point being, if you think conspiracy is ridiculous, look at the news.
Yeah, and watch him be convicted on a conspiracy charge in a couple of weeks as well. Yeah, well, the difference in Georgia was he made those phone calls to the officials, so they have him as well. He doesn't have to be unindicted there.
Lordy, let there be tapes.
Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. The university has just called the police on me, but I refuse to budge because I'm not in university. You have no power here. Be gone.
Yeah. But invoking cloture is a different thing altogether.
Right. Can't do that either, though. So I have the button.
So I've got this one paragraph in the Detroit News talking about the Michigan case, which I think clarifies things. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so I always have to be reminded of this stuff, just like I'm not a congressional expert. So
you're
I
not
always
a
have to be
lawyer.
reminded of this stuff.
All right.
But in talking about the fact that there are 11 co-conspirators, the Detroit News helpfully defines a little bit about what does that mean exactly.
I don't know. Was you asking me?
In total,
was you taking
it
notes?
says, over the last 2 days, Schock, that's Nessel's aide,
Code name.
who's testifying in this Michigan
A person by the name of Schock.
false elector trial.
Presumably their last name, Schock.
Schock, that's his last name.
It's just one of those one-name people like Cher.
Yeah, his
My
first name
name's
is
Schock.
Wada.
Oh,
Mr. Wada Schock. The Michigan investigator identified 11 conspirators
Schock.
who haven't been charged with a crime. Those are the co-conspirators.
That's
like
also
Trump.
a shock. They haven't been charged.
This means Michigan prosecutors believe they participated to some extent in an alleged scheme to commit forgery by creating a false document asserting Trump had won Michigan's 16 electoral votes when Democrat Joe Biden had really won them.
Yeah.
That's what the case is about. So when you do that, you can be involved in a conspiracy. Now, Georgia has a RICO law. I don't know if Michigan has something similar, so I don't know if they could be indicted and charged with the same sort of thing. That's a state-by-state thing. But in New York, there is an election law that basically says it's illegal, only a misdemeanor, but it's illegal nonetheless, to basically lie about an election for the purposes of trying to, keep stuff from the voters.
Okay.
And the whole catch and kill thing that Trump was doing with David Pecker was that, because Pecker testified, not yesterday, but the day before, that this was all in service to the election. Then if you falsify business records to pay for it, another misdemeanor, you have a misdemeanor falsified records trying to conceal another crime, which happens to be a misdemeanor. But if you use records to conceal a crime, that's a felony.
Yes.
That's what's going on in New York, and that's, my view of the theory of the case. And that's why Pecker's so central to all of this. He's not a peripheral guy who's saying, oh, let me just set the stage for how sleazy things are. He's explaining that everything that's going on here is, in Pecker's words, in service of the campaign. And that's key. Without that, you don't have a case.
Aha.
In my view.
Yes.
And I'm not a lawyer.
No.
So, although the legals, like Judge Sugarman writing in the New York Times, this is an embarrassment of a case. I think this is actually real, and you're not really understanding New York law and what the Attorney General is doing. What the DA is doing. Tisha James is the Attorney General. That's a civil case. This is the DA with a criminal case.
Right.
And, how silly is it? Well, we'll find out when the jury comes back.
Yes,
so
that's true.
The jury's out on that one.
Well, come on back.
Right?
Why not?
But that's all key. And again, you have this going on in New York with David Pecker again coming back. What's he going to do today? He's going to talk, I think, a little bit more about Karen McDougal, because they haven't finished with that.
No.
And they haven't even started with Stormy Daniels yet. So he's going to have to talk a little bit about that. Now, other people have speculated, well, why on Truth Social does Trump scream at everybody but not David Pecker or Hope Hicks? He never attacks those two, and both of them are witnesses.
Yes.
And the answer is because Pecker and Hicks have more dirt.
Oh.
And
how
so
can he control himself
suddenly? Pecker's protected. That's why he has this big grin every time he looks over at Trump. I know more about you than they do, and don't you even think about trying to go after me, because I saved all that stuff.
It's amazing that
Pecker's the one that has saved all the good stuff in it, remember?
Suddenly Trump has found a way to constrain himself, and I'm surprised, honestly, that Pecker at this stage of the game is willing to constrain himself too. He should just be blurting things out.
Well, no, why not? Because it's a mutual, like, leave me alone. It's a MAD.
Yeah, but
mutual
what about
assured destruction?
Well, but what about my needs here, Greg?
Well, they
I
may
want
break
them both
through.
Destroyed.
They may break through in the end. You don't know.
Okay. Well, where's Perry Mason could have done this. All right. Well, you got to get his testimony out first.
See, the whole thing about Perry Mason is you could skip the whole show and just watch the last 4 minutes. It's like an NBA game.
If Pecker's not done, or they plan to recall him at some point, or to reveal it through somebody else, I guess.
Well, the question's going to be, what can you possibly bring up on cross-examination, or as they like to call it on TV, cross? What are you going to bring up on cross that could possibly help this case? Because Pecker's made an awfully strong case.
Yes. All right.
Again, the background material that gets Democrats pissed when you only look at the polls. All of this is going on. It's all sinking in. Do low information voters follow the trial day by? No, but they don't need to. It seeps in.
Okay.
It's just so it's everywhere. Good. Every time you pick up a paper, if you're in Michigan,
I don't pick up.
If you're in Arizona, if you're in a swing state, your local stuff is on the front page.
That's true. There are some swingy states that the morning bulletin is, oh, yeah, we're indicting that guy, too.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
It may happen in Nevada. I mean, swing states, important states.
It only has to happen in Clark County, though. And the rest of the state. Yeah.
So step back. Again, look at the big picture. This is Dan Pfeiffer in the message box on Substack.
All right.
Trump's trial is making him look weak. For the wannabe strongman, looking weak is worse than looking like a crook.
Okay. Yes.
Last week, he said, I weighed in after I became very annoyed at people arguing the trial could help Trump. Again, this is some of the same argument that Laksha Jain is making. That, it's just really annoying when the pundits look at the polls and say, oh, and the only other thing that's going on is the trial. And that's going to help Trump anyway, because we all know that.
Yes. They did say that for a long time. That'll get your blood pressure
up right then and there. So Dan Pfeiffer weighed in last week after I became very annoyed at people arguing the trial could help Trump, how much it'll hurt him, and in which ways are up for discussion. But it's absurd to believe that being on trial for falsifying business records to cover up an extramarital affair. Notice he didn't use hush money. This is not a hush money trial.
Right.
It is a cover-up trial. It is
a
conspiracy trial.
That hush money is a bad thing. He is guilty of that. Don't worry about it.
But that may not be legal. I'm not sure about that. I don't know about the catch and kill. I don't know if that's legal. It doesn't matter. That's not at the heart of the case.
Yeah.
The heart of the case is that they were trying to influence an election, and you don't have to prove that in New York. All you have to prove is his intent was to violate that New York state law. And he covered it up with business records. That can be proven. That's what's going on here.
Terrific.
So in all of the discussion about how persuadable voters are consuming the allegations and would react to a hypothetical conviction, I think we're missing the forest for the trees.
Oh, again, I'm always doing that.
Interestingly, Michael Steele, Nicole Wallace, Jennifer Rubin, I'm just naming names. There's a few other columnists who've written something very similar in the sense that what they're writing is, you think it's sleazy. The lawyers turn their nose up at this because this is a sleaze case. So the legals don't really want to consider this to be the heart of real law, which is insurrection. But the public looks at this and takes it all in and says, yuck.
There is that.
The political damage to Trump is not what's said in the courtroom. It's how he looks. After spending his whole life in 3 presidential campaigns cultivating an image of power and strength, the first week of the trial made the former president look weak, tired, and scared. More than any testimony, the image of the former president silently and sadly at the defense table, stripped of the pomp and circumstance, I would add, kept away from his Diet Cokes,
true,
and the ability to tweet and put out posts on Truth Social.
I'm not positive about that, but okay.
And falling asleep and farting and smelling up the courtroom. I mean, none of this has been good for him.
So momentarily, I'm sure some of it is satisfactory, but
just the farts. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's like good for you in the long run. Right. One of the long-running themes of his newsletter is that strength is the prism through which we best understand Donald Trump's political success. I wrote late last year. Back in 2002, former President Clinton offered one of the most trenchant analysis of American politics. In a speech after Democrats had just gotten clobbered in 2002, Clinton explained George W. Bush's post-9/11 political success. When people feel uncertain, they'd rather have somebody strong and wrong than weak and right. And this analysis explains why Trump won in 2016, almost won in 2020, and is leading in the polls. People are uncertain about the country and the world's future. They're bombarded by images, often out of context. And to many, the world feels out of control, so people gravitate toward authoritarians. They're willing to sacrifice a lot for the perception of safety and security. I wish this wasn't the case because it incentivizes bad outcomes. But the core message of the Trump campaign is that the world is falling apart. America is changing in dangerous ways. Joe Biden is too weak to protect you. You could argue that Trump has been so successful in claiming blue cities like New York, and this is me, not him, are hellholes that you can't dare to go into, so therefore none of his supporters dare to show up at the courtroom.
That's kind of funny as well.
It is. I don't think that's what's really happening because there are people in Manhattan who voted for Donald Trump. It's a big place and you can find a dozen.
Yes.
They didn't show up either.
Right. They're busy.
This is why Trump and his media allies spend so much time amplifying out of context images of chaos in the border, protests on college campuses. That's where the caravan stuff came in Virginia many years ago. It's why they spend so much time lying about the crime rate, demonizing immigrants. MAGA politics depend on a populace that's so afraid they'll put aside their concerns about everything else for voting for somebody with a long records of misdeeds because, strength. But weak and whiny, that completely demolishes that image.
Well, get with the program. He's quite whiny.
I mean, most voters think Trump has committed crimes. A disturbingly large swath of those folks are planning to vote for him anyway. But other than the most diehard members of the base, Trump hasn't pulled the wool over people's eyes. They know who he is. So there's no point in saying, well, here's yet another example of who we know who he is. That's not how you beat him. You beat him by saying, oh, by the way, in addition to being who you thought he was, he's a weak, whiny old man.
Okay. Yes.
Who's going to vote for that? I mean, he's a weak, whiny crook.
I'm against him.
While David Pecker, the head of the National Enquirer, offered blockbuster testimony about Trump's involvement in various schemes, my big takeaway is the image of a weak, sad man who can barely stay awake. Trump should thank his lucky stars, no cameras.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? His impromptu press conferences in the hallway as he enters and exits the courtroom consist of whining about the unfairness of it all. He can barely muster the braggadocio and bluster that's been his trademark. His tone and body language evens fear. And then any day now, any hour now, Marchand's going to come out with his contempt order. Not enough people are paying attention to the trial, and only a fraction of the electorate are seeing the photos or the temper tantrums in the hallway, but that could change over the course of the trial. He can survive a jury of his peers convicting him, but he may not survive a courtroom proceeding stripping him of his greatest weapon, the perception of power and strength. The fact that you have to be in court at all is a big deal. And then, by the way, just as a footnote, one of those, oh, thank you, let me set aside, you set aside, and pocket, I set aside wherever I do these things, is Just Security, which has an alphabetical list of 41 star witnesses and bit players in Trump's New York criminal trial. There's so many people involved, and you don't know who they all are. You know who Pecker is.
Yes.
You know who Stephanie Clifford is. You know her by her stage name, Stormy Daniels.
What? That's her name. Okay.
Michael Cohen, Kellyanne Conway, Robert Costello, who was his lawyer.
Does he have a stage name?
Robert Costello.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Right.
Sometimes he calls himself Lawyer C, at least that the indictments do. Steve Bannon. I mean, you know some of these people. Yeah. And then there's a whole list of people you don't know. He's in trouble too. And so they have a nice little list of it. So if somebody comes up like Mark Kasowitz, who's a law firm guy who represented Trump during the Mueller investigation, his name may come up. Jared Kushner, of course, you know.
Of course I know.
Jeffrey McConney, he's the Trump Organization controller. John McEntee, another White House.
We're that guy.
You sort of remember them, but like, where does this fit in? Dan Scavino, Keith Schiller, who was the body man. The Trumps, Weisselberg, Madeleine Westerhout is going to turn out to be an important figure. Trump's executive assistant at the beginning of his term. So it's a nice list for when things come up in court and you don't remember who they are. You can always go back and look at it.
All right. Where do I get one of those? I'll keep it. I'll pin it up on the wall here.
All right. If I haven't sent it to you, I will.
All right.
But I did. There it is. 41 star witnesses and bit players.
Oh,
That's
okay.
what it's titled.
Oh, okay. I see. I didn't see the list, though, but I would open it up. Then I'll see it. Okay.
Yeah, if you wish.
I do. I wish I had already done it.
Right. So other things that are in the news, of course, today is the immunity hearing day. I don't even know what to say about the Supreme Court. It was so outrageous yesterday when they were talking about EMTALA, which we covered on the show.
Yes.
And how that's approached. And I have to say, after watching the experts look at how the justices responded, there's absolutely no way to know how they're going to come out on this.
Yeah. Okay.
It's pretty clear. The ladies, which include the conservative lady,
Amy Coney
Barrett, were really upset with the idea that this was even happening. I mean, she said to the Idaho people, "Why are you even here?"
Oh. That's not what you want to hear normally.
That's not what you want to hear normally.
Okay.
It was pretty clear Alito was trying to find any possible way, along with Gorsuch, to say, well, this is really an important case because fetal personhood is a thing and EMTALA should protect that too. Thomas was useless. So those 3, we know where they are. Those 4, we know where they are. What we don't know is where Roberts and Kavanaugh come down. So if there are 4 people who say this is stupid, you lose. And we don't know where Roberts and Kavanaugh on. That could be a 5-4 loss for the good guys. It could be a 5-4 win for the good guys. It could be a 6-3 win for the good guys. Do I think Roberts would join 6-3? I don't think so. I think more likely Kavanaugh joins the ladies and it's 5-4, but there's no way to know. You just have to wait that one out. It was just appalling to even hear the argument.
Yeah, well, you're going to have
and
another
then today
appalling one today.
Is the immunity one. So, again, when it comes to the Supreme Court, what you're going to hear today is going to be appalling. You're going to look at it and say, why are we even here? Why are you doing this?
Right.
Why didn't you just let the trial go ahead and then do this later? What is wrong with you? And the answer to all of this is it's got nothing to do with the law. It has everything to do with the ideology and results that the justices on the conservative side want to see.
There's no blaming this on staff or aides. This is their choice. The scheduling of what they hear is up to them, and they're choosing to do this. Not all of them are agreeing, but if you're looking for the person to blame, I mean, they can't say, majority, well, I don't know, staff gave it to me. No.
Including Roberts, decided to do this. So, you just have to cross your fingers and hope. It may not be a disaster, and it may turn out to be a total disaster, and we lose everything.
Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes Roberts is a weird guy, and sometimes I wonder whether he takes outrageous cases with the intent of, well, what I'll do is I'll take this one that is outrageous, and then people will say, I can't believe they're even considering this, and I'll say, don't worry. We're reasonable. I'm flatly rejecting this, and it's going to lose 9-0. I took it to show you how reasonable I was, but then just don't take it. Then we would know right up front.
I don't even know about that.
I don't know if it's
Roberts'
happening.
Problem here.
That's a total speculation, which is great for a show.
Yeah,
I love
it'd be great. But I think Roberts' problem here is that he's torn between his view of federalism, which is the state should decide everything and the federal government should decide nothing. And the proper balance between the state and the feds is that the federal government shouldn't even exist.
Except
that's his view of
balance.
federalism. He acts on it. And that's on the one hand. And on the other hand, the real life, oh my gosh, women are dying if we let the states do everything. I don't like that. So how do I balance my ridiculous reactionary view of what the states can and can't do versus what I'm seeing with my own eyes? And Kavanaugh's, to a lesser extent, got the same issue. I think Kavanaugh's more likely to say, well, in this case, I think you have to save the life of the women. And in Roberts' case, he may well come down on the side of, federalism view is overall what's more important than anything else.
Sure. Why not? The founders
Again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm
women,
not a SCOTUS expert, but that's how it strikes me as a layman.
Well, it would be very difficult I would think, to go home at the end of the day if that's your approach to everything. But, some of these guys find marriage partners who profess to believe the same thing somehow. So I don't know.
Right.
It does happen.
Now, here's a piece, again, from Axios. I'm just surprised because it's usually Republican-leaning, but I've been pulling these pieces.
Yeah.
This one about Trump's warning signs in suburbia. They picked up the same stuff we were talking about the other day.
Well, what the hell was I talking about the other day?
Nikki Haley, who suspended her campaign last month, has received double-digit vote shares in key suburban counties in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Georgia. We were just talking about Pennsylvania the other day.
All right.
In Chester County, Haley won 25% of the vote. In Delaware, 23%. In Montgomery, 25%. In Bucks, 19%. Bucks is generally a Trump county. Wisconsin, Haley won 12% or more in each of the 3 large suburban areas outside of Milwaukee, which is the WOW counties, Waukesha, Ozaukee, and Washington. She slightly overperformed in these counties compared to overall vote totals. Trump's announced Wednesday he's holding a rally in Waukesha next week. Wonder why. Georgia, Haley, who dropped out after some early ballots had been cast, still made a sizable primary showing in suburban Atlanta, including 23 in Cobb, 17 in Gwinnett. Between the lines, almost 17% of GOP voters cast the ballot for Haley on Tuesday.
Yeah, this
Trump also
underperformed
cause. In Pennsylvania counties that were strongholds for him, like Lancaster. You can't win without these voters, especially in states like the Rust Belt states of Pennsylvania and others, said Vince Galco, Pennsylvania GOP strategist.
Okay.
So, on the other hand, President Trump resoundingly won. Yeah, but he wasn't running against anybody.
And he's not president. But, yeah. Lancaster, he wins in the Amish vote? Is that what's happening?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, all right. They have to make their own ballots.
Joshua Smithley, if you want to follow him on Twitter, he's the Pennsylvania expert who thinks Biden's probably ahead by about 2 points here.
Okay.
But, whatever the polls show, like Morning Consult and Fox, when they do swing states, he says the Pennsylvania pollsters, Susquehanna, Franklin and Marshall, the polls that know Pennsylvania have Biden ahead, and that's probably where things are. Okay. Can they change? Yeah. Is it early? Yeah. Have Democrats consolidated? Not yet. So all these things are happening, but it's all about the counties surrounding Philadelphia. That's really where
Franklin Marshall is in Lancaster.
Won and lost. And then finally, my last thing I have today is just a laugh.
And
Jim Sciutto reported the other day, after 15 months of coming up short, James Comer recently approached one of his Republican colleagues and made a blunt admission. He was ready to be done with the impeachment inquiry into Biden.
Hey.
You can read about that on CNN if you want to.
I think I would like to. Is that's in here?
No, but it will be.
Okay, that's enough. You can just say yes to that then.
Okay. But that was the leadoff for what I wanted to read to you. Because that's interesting, of course.
Yes.
But one of the people on the committee who has been giving James Comer a hard time in addition to Jamie Raskin is Jared Moskowitz.
Yes.
And Jared Moskowitz has a great sense
bit of a card, yes.
So he saw that James Comer admission that they got nothing, and he wrote this.
Yeah.
James, talking to James Comer, I was hoping our breakup would never become public. We had such a great thing while it lasted, James. I will miss the time we spent together. I will miss our conversations. I will miss the pet names you gave me. I only wish you the best and hope you find happiness.
Well, he's a pleasant guy.
It's actually pretty funny. And so James Comer, not only was – you may not remember this because I think like most normal people don't, but Alejandro Mayorkas was impeached, and then the impeachment was dismissed as being a crock, and that all happened within like 15 minutes.
Yes, and it was extremely important, actually.
And then they were going to try to impeach Biden, and they got nothing.
Yeah.
This has just been an awful week for Republicans, starting in the courts and then going through what Congress did and the humiliation of Moscow Marge and then this. And it's just, again, Laksha Jain's point. Yeah, you can look at the polling from places like Fox, and then you could look at the overall environment. And, of course, Democrats are pissed. You seem not to be picking up on any of this. And when you see it, you dismiss it and say, well, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
And that's why we get annoyed.
Yes.
New York Times just flat out comes out and says, yeah, and we're going to keep doing this until Biden gives us the interview we want. And you know what? It isn't just the New York Times. It's all the cable stations. It's everybody else who's covering. They want that exclusive for themselves. They're putting themselves above the country. They're giving Biden a hard time because they feel slighted that he thinks they're a crock. Yeah. And in this case, on this issue, Biden's right.
Yeah, he is. And well, we've been right, and I assume he also has been right on this issue for quite some time. For some reason, it made me think of, as you were saying, all the cable stations and all the networks feel the same way, and why isn't he sitting down with us? And I went back to who was it that interviewed Elizabeth Warren and asked, isn't saying that Trump is, I don't know, did she say racist outright? Isn't that name calling too? Aren't you guilty of the same thing? I remember that sort of as a watershed moment of like, this is they have to.
Isn't saying that
these
Trump
parallels.
is indicted, calling him a crook, isn't that name calling?
No, he's this. He is this thing.
He is this thing.
There's a difference. I guess the racist thing you could argue is subjective, but it's not a name. You're not saying, I mean, look, if Elizabeth Warren had gone on the air to say, well, the problem with Trump is he's a fat idiot. Well, then I would say, all right, well, minus the idiot part, that's name calling. I mean, he is an idiot, but you can't do that.
Since we're at the 9:57
hour.
Are
we already?
I'll just leave you with this. I read you that Jared Moskowitz tweet, which I thought was funny.
Okay.
And a lady writes in response, is there a Jared Moskowitz fan club I can join? And Moskowitz said there was, but my wife disbanded it.
Is she jealous?
I don't know.
All right. Well, yeah, there ought to be. There's always room for that. There's a need for that.
Right.
You got to have
somebody
humor.
else writes in, it's hard to believe Jared Moskowitz is an adult male. And Moskowitz writes back, well, male anyway.
I never said.
I never said I was an adult.
You only have to be 25 anyway. And even that you might not even have to be, because the Supreme Court says you can't throw me off the ballot.
Right.
Okay. Well, this is it. This is not only the end of today's segment, it's the end of the week for as far as you're concerned.
Oh, yeah, that
anyway.
too. I think that there's some interesting legal stuff to come up, and we'll see what happens. Right. You'll cover that tomorrow. I will. And I will see you on Monday.
Okay, very good. We'll see what happens in between. We'll see what happens in between now and then. There should be plenty. And
maybe all the other swing states will wind up indicting their false electors.
It would be terrific. There are some
some already have.
Yeah, some have. I started this thing yesterday. It turned out to be more timely than I thought. Was a I don't know, was it Lawfare or one of those types of sites, a roundup of where everybody was on their fake electors and whether they were going to indict them or not. But we started reading it not knowing that Arizona and Michigan were going to announce.
Yeah.
But, yeah, there are some states that are just like, no, we really don't expect to bring any charges.
Well, Nevada already has, by the way. They did that back in December.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. So I guess we'll head to that. Anyway, thank you for leading us up to that, and we'll check with you on Monday. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. What are we going to do again? Oh, yeah. Right. Okay. So we were going to, I thought maybe it would be wise to jump back to Pocket and restart our consideration of, where was it? There was a rundown of where all the various states were on the project of what to do about their fake electors. Here we are. How states are investigating and prosecuting the Trump fake electors. It was Lawfare. Is that right? I think so. All right. This one, and this is a long article, and we ought to get to it in just a minute here. We started it yesterday. How states are investigating and prosecuting the Trump fake electors. Hunter Evans, Adam George, Quinta Jurecic, and Emma Planke were the authors on this. This was, remember, the current status of nationwide efforts to hold accountable the people behind the 2020 fake electors plot. And we spent the all of what we had allotted for this, and I mean, it's a long read, discussing just Michigan and where Michigan was. And now we know where Michigan is. But as of our reading of this yesterday, which, I mean, you know, this was only written on Tuesday. So we were reading this on Wednesday, and then after we were reading it, we got the answer in Michigan. But their outline of what was going on with Michigan was that the Attorney General, announced felony charges against the fake electors themselves, but now we have a wider conspiracy being charged as well. So that's helpful. But I guess we can then, I feel like we definitely didn't get all the way through what had happened with Michigan, but it gets very, very weedy and lots of attorney type jargon at the end. But now we have that, new information and news story, and we can just sort of focus on that and then move on to what's happening in the other states, like Wisconsin, which is listed next here. The Wisconsin Elections Commission has twice rejected a complaint requesting the bipartisan commission to investigate the 10 fake electors. Under Wisconsin law, the commission has the power to investigate potential violations of Wisconsin election law and rules. Upon a finding that a violation has occurred, the commission can impose civil penalties or refer the case to a district attorney for criminal proceedings. The complaint filed by the nonprofit organization Law Forward in February of 2021 alleged that the fake electors violated Wisconsin election law, and you would think that they did, by attempting to cast Wisconsin's electoral college votes for Donald Trump in the 2020 election and disrupt the peaceful transfer of power. Like, yeah, hello, what's the story? On March 9th, 2022, the Election Commission issued its unanimous first rejection. To reach this conclusion, the Commission, and it is unanimous, to reach this conclusion, the Commission relied on a Wisconsin Department of Justice memorandum that, as described by the AP, found the, quote, Republicans weren't trying to fool the Senate, but instead were legitimately trying to preserve Trump's legal standing as courts were still deciding if he or Biden had won, unquote. In other words, they buy fully into the Eastman-Chesborough memo farce. The commission's decision provoked controversy, in part because Commissioner Robert Spindell, possibly, 2 L's, who had participated in the vote, was also one of the named fake electors. Like, come on. Seriously, it's linked in everything. I mean, there's a link. Could be to, garbage, but a link. Therefore, but we don't suspect Lawfare Media of making this up. Law Forward and a Madison-based law firm, Stafford Rosenbaum, filed a suit in Wisconsin state court to compel the Election Commission to reconsider the complaint without the participation of Spindell. Roughly 1 year after the commission first declined to initiate an investigation, Dane County Circuit Judge Frank Remington ordered the commission to review the complaint without Spindell's involvement. In December of 2023, the commission again refused to investigate by a 5-0 vote. What is happening there? Unlike the first hearing, the commission did not provide any explanation for its decision, which it reached in a closed-door session. What? After the commission rejected Law Forward's request to investigate the fake electors, the organization filed a civil complaint in state court against the 10 Wisconsin fake electors, along with Kenneth Chesborough. You know who he is, of course, an attorney whose memos served as the legal foundation for the fake electors plot, and James Trupus, a lawyer who led Trump's efforts in Wisconsin to overturn the election. The complaint alleges that the fake electors ignored state and federal law through deliberate attempts to overturn the state's certified elections results. These efforts, the complaint argued, culminated with the fake electors casting their votes and Wisconsin's electoral college votes for President Trump and sending them to the U.S. Senate. To pursue civil relief, Law Forward's complaint alleged several counts, including Wisconsin common law civil conspiracy, public nuisance, interestingly enough, under Wisconsin statutes, section 823.01, public nuisance under 823.02, common law quo warranto as codified by Wisconsin statutes section 784.04, in case you want to look all these things up, punitive damages under statutes 895.043 parens 3, and relief under with the Wisconsin Constitution, Article 1, Section 9, which permits the Wisconsin Constitution to act as the basis for a remedy when no other forum exists. Wow. Although it does read here, the editors need to note, it does say, when no other forum does not exist. Which, well, that's probably not how it reads. In late December of 2023, Law Forward and the fake electors reached a settlement. This includes an acknowledgement from each fake elector that Biden fairly won Wisconsin's presidential election in 2020, a notification to the relevant government offices that the electoral certificates were fake, and a prospective ban on each elector from serving as a presidential elector in 2024, and any other election with Trump on the ballot. in case he lives. The fake electors, however, were not required to admit wrongdoing. Come on. Or pay any of the $2.4 million in punitive damages sought by Law Forward. I don't care about the money damages, although that is interesting and brings up another interesting point. Let me pause here just to shift gears and offer you something completely different. Not completely different. A completely different source who makes a relevant tangential point. I happened to notice this over at that other site some of you read, Daily Kos. Well, let's see if it will load here. It's taking its sweet time doing it, but I think eventually it will come up. But it was a piece entitled, I got to open up a new pocket again. I should just store this away and remember this will happen, under the title of One Underappreciated Effect of the Fake Elector Cases. And, well, it's really taken forever to load. But the gist of it was, here we are, by the pop-ups, by Justin423, who makes this brief but good point. And I think we ought to, it may not be a major, earthquake, but it is an interesting point, something to ponder. One predictable effect, it starts off here, of the various states charging the fake electors is that because these people were state party officials, right? The electors, they tend to be state party officials, state legislators, big, as they say, big machers in the Republican and in the Democratic Party. That's where they choose people from. And basically, I guess it would probably be kicked up higher, but for the fact that members of Congress are forbidden from serving as electors constitutionally, which may have something to do with the fact that their votes would be counted in Congress. They're both the arbiters of the validity, I guess, of those votes and the ones casting them. So it's troublesome. So the next highest, available people to offer rewards to are top donors and both party operatives. So yes, one predictable effect then of the various states charging the fake electors is that because these people were state party officials, any lawyers hired by the defendants will very likely, or at least this is a possibility, could likely have their fees paid for by the state party. For example, in Georgia, the state Republican Party has spent $1.7 million in the last 3 months on the criminal defense legal fees. This pattern is also playing out in Nevada, Michigan, and now will likely repeat in Arizona, as the former state party chair and other party officials were charged. This has the effect of diverting resources away from things like, the ground game and voter registration in very closely divided states. That's it. That's the whole summation of the diary, and it's succinct and to the point. I don't know that in every case the state party will be expending its funds on the defense, but where it's happened, it's happened. And where there's a $1.7 million sized hole in their budget, that's just the way it is. They're going to have to live with it and try and work around it. At the same time, Trump is sucking up all the money that would otherwise be going to those states, possibly, in order for him to burn on his defense. The Republican Party is going to be near bankrupt in the middle of this fight. Definitely a good point. Okay. Heading back over to lawfare. We were still in the middle of considering what happened in Wisconsin. And 2 months later, we were 2 months later from the late December 2023 settlement between Law Forward and the fake electors. 2 months later, Law Forward reached a second settlement with the remaining defendants, Chesebro and Troupis. Under the settlement, both defendants admit that their conduct was an improper attempt to overturn the legitimate 2020 presidential election results in Wisconsin, and that they will refrain from participation in election certification and selection of electors unless certified as the persons elected as presidential electors under state law. Okay, convoluted, but the settlement also required the individuals to release a large tranche of previously unseen communications among Chesebro, Troupis, Trump campaign officials, and Wisconsin Republicans. And I imagine we've seen some of those, and we read about some of those, but there's still a lot of Chesebro analysis that's still sitting in pocket for me, by the way. I mean, I think we got the gist of the hottest stories out, but maybe we should head back to that at some point. The newly released documents provide a window into the Trump campaign's efforts to manufacture legitimacy for the president's baseless claims of election fraud and show in great detail the extensive role that Chesebro and Troopers played in the fake electors scheme in Wisconsin and elsewhere, which is, I guess, how they find themselves how Chesebro finds himself in enough trouble that he agrees to cooperate with other states and with federal prosecutors such that these other charges are being brought. Anyway, December also saw the first stirrings of a possible state criminal investigation against the fake electors. That month, CNN reported that Chesebro was cooperating with state-level investigations in Wisconsin as well as Michigan, who now we have some news from Michigan, Nevada, which, as Greg pointed out, we already had news from, and Arizona, which yesterday we had some news from. Chesebro's cooperation, the network wrote, represented the first indication the state attorney general's office had launched its own investigation into the false slates of pro-Trump electors. No other details have yet been reported. So this is interesting in that they didn't wait for a referral from, what's the name of the board that we're talking about here? The Wisconsin Elections Commission, which is going to be awfully embarrassing. It's not going to look good historically. Like we rejected the notion that there should even be an investigation unanimously twice. Once with one of the fake electors voting, and then we got rid of them, and we still came up with an unexplained 5-0 unanimous decision. And then it turns out that the state attorney general said, well, actually, I'm just going to do this on my own anyway, which is, I'm sure, a nightmare for them. They're going to look like idiots, which I'm sure they already do. Now, moving on to Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania we haven't heard much about, right? But Pennsylvania's fake electors have not faced prosecution, nor are they likely to in the future. And I think I remember one of the reasons why is Pennsylvania is one of the places where the fake electors actually demanded some protection, right? Some written indication that it was their intent only to, that they were serving up these fake elector certificates only to be regarded in the case of a courtroom win that legitimized their claim, right? And that's one of two places where they actually did this. The only one that actually mattered, or was even close, I guess. Because I think the New Mexico electors, fake electors, did it too, but there was like no chance in hell that they were ever going to come close to making a claim at winning New Mexico. Pennsylvania's fake electors have not faced prosecution, nor are they likely to in the future. In 2022, then Pennsylvania Attorney General Josh Shapiro, now the state's governor, announced that the fake electors' rhetoric and policy were intentionally misleading and purposefully damaging to our democracy. However, he conceded that our office does not believe this meets the legal standards for forgery. His successor, Attorney General Michelle Henry, holds the same position. And maybe Shapiro thought that was the only way that he could get all the way to the governor's mansion at the time, and maybe he should consider changing his mind. But let's read what the rest of it has to say. Key to Shapiro's conclusion was that caveat included in the Pennsylvania certification documents, which stated that the certificate would be considered valid only if later the courts determined that we are the duly elected and qualified electors of the state. That should make a big difference, I guess. Even though, honest to God, you really should never have attempted this in the first place. The Pennsylvania fake electors have claimed that they were merely completing a formality ahead of a statutory deadline that would be necessary should the Trump campaign's pending legal challenges to the state's vote tallies prevail. The document's caveat gives that claim legal credence. One signatory later explained, this was in no way, shape, or form us trying to go around the election. Although, I do caution you about this. If other pieces of the puzzle had fallen into place, right, there are fake electoral certificates accompanied by, does it say exactly how now it matters to me how this was executed physically. Pennsylvania fake electors, the caveat included in the certification documents, which stated that the certificate would be considered valid only if the courts blah, 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 blah. interesting to me. Like, if it's in the certificate, I might consider it differently than if it's an addendum, like an extra letter on top, and it's included with the certificates. So we've made our position clear. But if other pieces of the puzzle had fallen into place, and let's say Mike Pence had agreed to go along with the scheme and had gotten an envelope from Pennsylvania, opened it, read the letter in there that says this stuff is only valid if the courts do X, Y, and Z, and the courts have not done X, Y, and Z, can Mike Pence conceivably throw the letter in the trash and then say, look at these certificates. They appear to be regular in form and authentic and blah, 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 and we're going to count these votes. And, no one is going to say, what's that letter you just threw in the trash? Or if it's in the body of the certificate, which makes it impossible to keep one and throw the other one away. I mean, you could read it partially or just say it looks to be regular in form. I don't know that that's a great protection against pulling off the scheme, which should count for something. But it might be enough to say, well, clearly we're going to have a hell of a time convincing a jury of their intent, given that they've included this caveat. I could see that's probably why Josh Shapiro made the conclusion he did. But at this point, with everybody else charging them in every other state, I guess you might also then argue, well, now it doesn't even matter. They're going to end up being, if things go right, they end up being convicted federally and in 4 states, maybe 5 states. What's adding another state charge going to do? But on the other hand, you might say, well, maybe we want to roll the dice and protect the integrity of our state too. What about Nevada? In December of 2023, a Nevada grand jury indicted 6 defendants, all of whom signed their names as Trump electors, for their involvement in the fake electors scheme, because they were fake. The 6 are currently awaiting trial for state felony criminal charges. Publicly released transcripts of Cheeseborough's testimony before a Nevada grand jury provide background on what took place in the state. According to Cheeseborough, the 6 fake electors for Nevada in the 2020 general election worked with him to submit a false electoral certificate claiming that Trump, not Biden, won the state. Cheeseborough testified that he provided the Nevada Gop with a step-by-step explanation of how to prepare and submit the fake certificate as part of the campaign's scheme to overturn the legitimate results of the 2020 election. The Trump campaign placed special significance on Nevada early on, with the president himself calling one of the fake electors. Okay, there's your nexus. Why isn't he charged? Nevada Republican Party Chairman Michael McDonald, that is, to organize those efforts. The transcripts of testimony to the House's Select Committee on January 6 further reveal that initial planning began at least 4 days before the election, which is rather amazing as well. I don't even want to wait for the election to take place. Let's start forging certificates now. Holy mackerel. Well, I don't know if that was the content of the conversation, but clearly of some interest. The journey to the Nevada indictment has been somewhat tangled. The 6 fake electors initially avoided criminal charges after Attorney General Aaron Ford determined that state laws did not cover the fake elector scheme. In May of 2023, Ford said that his office had ascertained that current state statutes did not directly address the conduct in question. Forgery should be illegal in Nevada. If it's not, have a great time. Go to the casinos. Anyway, in response, the Nevada legislature passed legislation that would criminalize future fake elector attempts, but Republican Governor Joe Lombardo vetoed the bill. Wow. 4 months later, Ford walked back any indications that the fake electors would avoid criminal liability and signaled that prosecution was possible. What do you know? The reason for Ford's mixed messaging on the issues remains unclear, but maybe it had something to do with the veto of the bill. Despite Ford's initial findings, a grand jury indicted the fake electors in December of 2023. What do you know? The 6 fake electors are each charged with offering a false instrument for filing under Nevada Revised Statutes, I imagine is what NRS means. Nevada Revised Statutes 239.30 and uttering a forged instrument under NRS 205.110. They face nearly a decade in prison and $15,000 in fines if convicted on both counts. Their trial was originally set for March of 2024, but has been delayed until January of 2025. when they can, well, they won't be pardoned on state charges. But, well, that's what the Constitution says. But then to hell with that, right? If Donald Trump manages to force his way back into the White House, declare himself president, why be restricted to being able to pardon federal crimes when the president must certainly want to be able to pardon state crimes? So why not just go ahead and do it? There's no laws. Go right ahead. On January 29th, 2024, defendant Michael McDonald filed a petition for a writ of habeas corpus. Really? Did he think he was in jail? Arguing that the state had failed to establish probable cause and provide exculpatory evidence. Defendants Jesse Law and Eileen Rice later joined the petition. Also on January 29th, Rice filed a motion to dismiss the case for improper venue, arguing that the case could only be heard in Douglas County, where the fake electoral certificates were mailed from to Washington, D.C., or in Carson City, where the fake electoral certificate was executed by the defendants. Attorneys for the other defendants have stated that the others will join Rice's motion as well. We'll see where they get with that one. Prosecutors responded to both filings on February 8th, arguing that they had presented sufficient evidence to establish probable cause for each charge, and that Clark County is proper venue because the defendants committed preparatory acts, i.e. drafting and revising the fake electoral certificates, in Clark County. The court has not ruled on either issue yet, and in the meantime, some of the defendants remain involved in state and local elections, including the Nevada Republican Party's caucus in February, when they really should be in jail. Anyway, what about New Mexico? Okay, we mentioned them earlier. A recently concluded investigation conducted by New Mexico Attorney General Raul Torres determined that the Trump campaign worked closely with the state Republican Party to submit an alternate, quote unquote, I would say, alternate slate of electors to the 2020 general election. The Trump campaign supplied 5 fake New Mexico electors with fake electoral certificates, as well as with guidance for finishing and submitting it to the National Archives, which should be a federal crime, quite honestly. The New Mexico fake electors are unlikely to face criminal penalties, however, in part because of caveats included in the fake certificate. Like the fake Pennsylvania certificate, which contained additional language, maybe it is in the certificate itself, that foreclosed forgery charges against the Trump electors in that state. And there are some links. We should probably take a look and see what the documents look like one of these days. The fake electors in New Mexico qualified their certificates' use as contingent, quote, on the understanding that it might later be determined that we are the duly elected and qualified electors, unquote. Under New Mexico law, forgery requires acting with an intent to injure or defraud, but Torres concluded that the fake electors' qualifying language communicated that they were not, at that time, New Mexico's legitimate presidential electors. Additionally, New Mexico lacks laws criminalizing the submission of fake electoral votes. Come on. Election certificate forgery and impersonating public officers. Viable avenues for prosecution in other states with fake electors such as Michigan and Georgia. You're telling me that New Mexico says it's not against the law to impersonate public officers or to forge public documents? Of course it is. I understand the caveat is enough, but okay. I mean, don't pretend that they don't have those laws. And if they don't, I'm moving to New Mexico. Well, Torres is, in fact, I already did. In fact, I'm the governor of New Mexico. Terrific. And I pardon myself as well. Why don't you write yourself a pardon for anything you do? If you're in New Mexico, commit any crime you like, say you're the governor, and submit a written pardon, because there's no law about although it does say no law about criminalizing submission of fake electoral votes or certificates. I'm sure there's no law that says that specifically electoral voting certificates. But I mean, a forgery is a forgery. So the general forgery statute should be covering things, don't you think? Okay. Anyway, while Torres' investigation ended without charges against the fake electors, the office's final report nonetheless called for changes in New Mexico law, like maybe let's get a forgery law, to prevent similar events from occurring in the future. Torres specifically recommended amending the state's electoral code to criminalize falsely acting as a presidential elector. He also suggested 2 amendments to Section 1-20-9, falsifying election documents, of the state's electoral code. One Oh boy. To include within its scope documents like the 2020 fake electoral certificate, and two, alright, hold on for the music. Two, very exciting. We're going to have music underneath this one. To remove the intent requirement so that individuals cannot escape criminal liability by using conditional language in the future. Oh, okay. Why not? The Republican Party of New Mexico opposed Attorney General Torres's legislative suggestions, stating that they would effectively criminalize the process used by both Democrats and Republicans. Oh, New Mexico Democrats have acted on Torres's recommendations, however, and voted House Bill 19 out of committee in February. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We've put a whole segment in on this thing, and we're still not done. We're finishing up, though, with New Mexico. I feel like we got to get these things on the record just to remind everybody of what's happening elsewhere, even though there's so much happening, today and in the last couple of days that we have to catch up on as well. But here we are. All right. So as we were leaving, we noted that New Mexico Democrats have acted on Attorney General Torres's suggestions, adopting House Bill 19, or at least moving it out of committee on February 2nd. That bill criminalizes knowingly or recklessly disrupting election results, including submitting a fake electoral certificate. It's about time to make that actually illegal in its own right. And falsely acting as a presidential elector, and would eliminate the ability to use conditional language as a defense to the charge of falsely acting as a presidential elector. That is of some interest. It remains to be seen whether there is sufficient political momentum to enact any of the proposals in New Mexico's next legislative session. And I can only imagine that criminal indictments in Michigan, Nevada, and Arizona would be of some help. I mean, neighboring Arizona. What about in Georgia? Well, we've heard a lot more lately. Well, not so much lately. But we've heard a lot more about what was happening in Georgia, of course, because they have the celebrated case going on there. 3 of Georgia's fake electors, Kathleen Alston Latham, David Schaffer, Schafer, and Sean Still, are named as defendants in the Fulton County District Attorney's sprawling racketeering indictment, alongside Donald Trump and high-profile allies of the former president. At least 8 of the state's fake electors reportedly accepted immunity deals that shield them from prosecution in exchange for their cooperation with investigators and testimony in the case. Interestingly, one of the first ones out of the box is less punitive to the majority of their fake electors in exchange for getting the top folks, I guess. Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, who also served as a fake elector, right, is being investigated after a prolonged delay. A judge disqualified District Attorney Fani Willis from investigating Jones after she held a fundraiser for Jones's opponent during the 2020 race for lieutenant governor. It then fell to a nonpartisan state agency, the Prosecuting Attorneys Council of Georgia, to appoint a special prosecutor to investigate Jones, Pete Skandalakis, who leads the council, appointed himself to the probe, lead the probe in April, which I guess is okay, although it doesn't help when your name includes the word scandal. But, Skandalakis, with K's, not C's. But I don't know. I don't know anything about Pete Skandalakis, but good luck to him, I guess, if he's going to take this on forthrightly. I don't even know if that's the case. Anyway, the fate of the state's remaining electors who were not named in the indictment and who may or may not have received immunity deals remains unclear. I don't know what kind of guy Skandalakis is. But there's a link about him appointing himself from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution if you want to read a little bit about that. Let's see. The indictment, Fani Willis's indictment, charges Latham, Schaefer, and Still with impersonating a public officer under OCGA. Let's see. I don't know what it actually stands for in Georgia, but the Georgia State Code there, Section 16-10-23, right? So that's impersonating a public officer. Why don't we could just drop the citations and tell you what the crimes are. Impersonating a public officer, forgery, false statements and writings, and attempting to file false documents. Under two different statutes there for the false documents. Latham also faces a range of additional charges in connection with her involvement in an alleged scheme to breach voting equipment in Georgia's rural Coffee County in an effort to prove, I would say, quote unquote, prove voter fraud. In addition to these three indicted fake electors, several others were indicted for their role in architecting. I don't know if I love that construction. No pun intended about architecting and construction, but architecting and coordinating the slate. So who were indicted for their roles in that weird way of thing, architecting the whole thing? Donald Trump, Rudy Giuliani, John Eastman, Kenneth Chesebro, Ray Smith III, Robert Cheeley, and Michael Roman. There's his name again, Michael Roman. That's the way we'll say it from now on. Were charged alongside three fake electors with criminal conspiracy to commit the offenses described above under OCGA 16-4-8. I guess that's our conspiracy statute. These defendants represent individuals involved at every level of the fake elector scheme. Eastman and Chesebro were the architects of the legal theory behind the plot. Smith and Roman allegedly worked to implement it as members of the Trump campaign, while Giuliani participated in his role as Trump's personal lawyer. Cheeley, meanwhile, allegedly facilitated the scheme on the local level in Georgia. Cheeley is also charged with perjuring himself in testimony before the Fulton County Special Purpose Grand Jury when signing their certifications. On December 14th, 2020, Georgia's fake electors defended their conduct using the same theory shared by other states' fraudulent slates. David Schaefer, the former chairman of the Republican Party in Georgia, stated at the meeting that the only way for us to have any judge consider the merits of our complaint, the thousands of people who we allege voted unlawfully, is for us to have this meeting. However, Georgia's fake electors failed to caveat their slate as contingent on the outcome of legal challenges of the vote count as those in Pennsylvania and Nevada did. Not Nevada, but New Mexico. It says Nevada, but they're wrong. On September 20th, 2023, the three electors named in the Fulton County indictment sought removal of their case to federal court. Arguing before Judge Steve Jones in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Georgia, they made the case that they were acting as contingent electors rather than fraudulent electors. And because they were allegedly legitimate contingent electors, they were performing a federal function by certifying their slate and thus acting as federal officials. Counsel for the defendants compared this situation to that of Hawaii in the 1960 presidential election. We've read about that, wherein a certified slate of electors for Nixon cast their votes alongside an uncertified slate of electors for Kennedy due to a pending legal challenge at the time. Because that legal challenge prevailed, Congress went on to count the votes of the Kennedy electors. Anna Cross, a prosecutor with the district attorney's office, countered that these private parties did not transform themselves into public actors by a criminal act, and that permitting a federal function does not make someone a federal official. How that ties up with the Supreme Court's interpretation of what state officials can and cannot do with respect to voting processes, ballots, etc. I don't know how that's going to hold up in the shadow of those somewhat dumb decisions. On September 29th, Jones denied each defendant's motion to remove, rejecting their arguments that they were acting as federal officials or as agents of federal officers. Jones found that electors do not qualify as federal officers under the text of the Constitution, prior Supreme Court precedent, or the structure and purpose of the role. He further found that the fake electors were merely acting. Oh, they were merely, acting. That's right. In compliance with federal statutes rather than at the direction of the president. Not just the president, but the president, the Senate, or the archivist, which was insufficient to support a finding of an agency relationship. So in other words, you're just not federal officials. Each defendant has appealed to the 11th Circuit. 3 non-elector defendants named in the indictment have accepted plea deals thus far, including Chesebro, Trump ally Sidney Powell as well. Both agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in the case in exchange for reduced sentences. I don't know if there's anything to be gotten out of Sidney Powell, though. Chesebro is known to be cooperating with Arizona Attorney General Chris Mays in the investigation. Is it Mays or Mayes? In the investigation of her state's fake elector slate, which brings us to Arizona, also in yesterday's news, and is the last of the states in this roundup. Arizona is in the unique position of having 2 different slates of fake electors. Did you know that? The number of fake electors in Arizona outnumbered the real electors. Isn't that something? One associated with the state's Republican Party, and another associated with a group called the Sovereign Citizens of the Great State of Arizona. Wow. Attorney General Mayes, let's give her the extra syllable there, opened investigations into both slates of fake electors after she took office in January of 2023. This investigation is ongoing, and the office has stressed its seriousness, telling the Arizona Republic in September of 2023 that it's a very solemn situation. It's a very important investigation. In March of 2024, Mayes' team issued grand jury subpoenas to individuals associated with Donald Trump's 2020 campaign, suggesting that Mayes is nearing a decision on whether to bring criminal charges. Well, we know what happened there. Those subpoenaed reportedly include former Trump campaign official Mike Roman and Arizona Representatives Andy Biggs and Paul Gosar, both of whom have reportedly been summoned to testify before the grand jury. I think I got something about that in pocket, too. Still waiting. In February of 2024, in response to the ongoing investigation, the Arizona Senate Judiciary Committee voted along party lines to open an inquiry into Mayes for allegedly failing to enforce state law and engaging in, quote, witch hunts. Some atmosphere she has to work in there. The chairman of that committee, Arizona Senator Anthony Kern, was, drumroll please, one of the 11 fraudulent electors associated with the state's Republican Party. So the chair of the committee was a fake elector, and he used his official position to launch an investigation into the person investigating him. Gee whiz. Mayes' forerunner in the office, Mark Brnovich, appears not to have conducted any investigation into the scheme, despite a request by then Secretary of State and now Governor Katie Hobbs that he do so. Mayes commented in March of 2023 that she was, quote, not certain that my predecessor did an investigation into the fake electors. Mayes is a Democrat, Brnovich, of course, a Republican. Though few public details about the Arizona investigation are available, or at least were available when they wrote this thing, news reports indicate that Chesebro traveled to Arizona in December of 2023 to meet with investigators from the Attorney General's office. And now, of course, we know the truth. The indictment is out. All right. Let's see. Other things to add to the mix for today. Oh boy, that's going to take us forever to get through that one. We might have to wait for Friday on a Just Security entry on why Trump will likely be held in contempt and then what happens after that. So that definitely of some importance. We got a lot of lengthy things here. I mean, I don't know. Absent the fact that we just spent so much time on rounding up all the states, I would have read you perhaps HuffPost's piece on the Arizona grand jury indictment of Trump and the 11 fake electors, but I can just include that in the roundup so you can read it. Let's see. Gosh, there's a million different things that we need to bring to your attention. One of which, I guess, timely, we really do have to bring to everyone's attention before it becomes, well, just so you know, Donald Payne Jr., in fact, congressman, 6-term congressman from New Jersey, has died yesterday at the age of 65. For some reason, everybody wants to know the age. And it's amazing. This is how old I feel, right? It's like, okay, when I was working on Capitol Hill, Donald Payne was in Congress, but I mean Donald Payne Sr. Now, Donald Payne Jr. has come and gone in that time. I'm very old. Anyway, I bring that up, well, one, because he was a good guy, seemed like a decent fellow himself, and a reliably progressive Democratic vote, but also in this closely divided Congress where we were just hearing just the other day. I mean, really, every day's news could change the makeup of Congress. Republicans were down to a 1-seat advantage, 2 votes, I guess, because of the way things swing, but 1-seat advantage because of the recent resignations, and I guess this gives them another leg up. Now, presumably we hadn't seen Payne show up for any votes recently. I don't think, I don't know. I'm not certain what his voting record was right up until the end there, but it comes down to things like this: 1 resignation, 1 death, 1 indictment. No one knows what may happen when, weirdo criminal defendants from the Republican Party are involved. No one knows what's going to happen with all of that. Or the 2 in Arizona who are going to be summoned before a grand jury. And if my recollection is correct, somewhere in pocket, there's a story about their intention to defy those subpoenas. Who knows what may yet happen. Anyway, just wanted to note the passing of Donald Payne and put it into our calculations, to put it as crassly as possible, that news. Anyway, let's see. I'm just trying to, here's something I guess I would add. Because we mentioned them yesterday, MintPress, who, as it turns out, was responsible, or one of the founders of MintPress, responsible for the dissemination of the claim that the students arrested at the protest at the University of Minnesota were going to be banned from the college campus, the university campus, for 1 year. And that turning out not to be true, or at least not true in the sense that we took it. Couple of things to add to this. One, the most charitable interpretation of events here, if you want one, would be to say it's starting to sound like it could be possible that what was meant by this 1-year ban thing is that while students were being arrested, it wasn't the students or anybody involved in the protest who was being banned for 1 year, but rather that one of the organizations behind this particular protest and protests, pro-Palestinian protests in general, or pro-Palestinian organizing, that perhaps it may be the case, and this too unproven at this point, but it may be that the organization is banned from the campus for a year, but not necessarily the students involved in it. In other words, there would be no official recognition of activities on campus by this organization for the next year, and I'm not even certain that happened. But that would be one more charitable explanation for how we got to the language of being banned for a year, but I just don't think that would have happened so quickly. I don't think they've had a chance to adjudicate that. That might be in the offing for them, but it probably hasn't happened. But then there was some suggestion that MintPress was somehow less than entirely trustworthy. So I thought I would add to the mix for our own analysis this piece. Of course, it's going to switch over from Pocket. I got to open it in its own window so that we don't lose our Pocket. But the Minnesota Post, minpost.com is the source we're reading from here. Not familiar with them, but identified up in the masthead here. Nonprofit independent journalism supported by readers, and everybody loves that. Here, a piece by one David Brower, writing under the Vertical of Brow blog at MinPost. Who is MintPress, and why are they doing all this hiring? I guess they drew some attention when they were first founded, and if this date is correct on here, and it looks like it is given the URL, this is from January of 2012. And the fact that they're still around tells me that they've had some success there at MintPress. But that combined with the other article we saw the other day, now I have some questions about this. But this, I guess at their outset, we find this brief piece here. Let's see. If 24-year-old Minar, M-N-A-R, Minar, maybe it's the pronunciation, Minar A. Muhawesh's dream. Minar Muhawesh is the name of the founder here of MintPress. If her dreams come to fruition, a low-rise Plymouth Bank building could become the headquarters of an international media success story. And I guess if it's made it from 2012 all the way to 2024, they've got, some claimed success at this point. Last week, and again, this is 2012, Muhawesh's news site, MintPress, quietly debuted, but careful observers of the local J scene couldn't miss it coming. For months, it seemed like every other ad on journalism help wanted sites was a MintPress position. Today, Muhawesh, not today, but 2012, a St. Cloud State journalism grad and former KARE Channel 11 intern, presides over a staff of 7, including 6 full-timers, with plans to hit 15 soon. Who knows where they are now? She was finalizing a deal with New York/Washington correspondents when we talked. Though the warren of offices contains some empty desks, there's a pro-looking logo affixed to the building's front, matched above the receptionist station, and 3 flat-screen TVs tuned to CNN, Fox, and Al Jazeera. A recent, I'm reading they don't differentiate by font size between photo captions and the body of the article. We're very big on being part of a social movement worldwide, she explains, tracing an arc from the Arab Spring in the Middle East to Occupy Wall Street in the United States. We want to ask more questions about policies, social issues, how we can rebuild this country, Muhawesh says. We're not bashing the system, we're covering issues. What's worked and what hasn't worked, she adds. When I look at stations like National Fox News, fair and balanced, the message they promote is violence and hate, not understanding. MSNBC, they make fun of or bash without bringing solutions to the table. Right now, our country is in decline. Everyone says that. That's the most popular line in the world. But our media has absolutely failed our country. Have to agree with that. Muhawesh is enough of a system non-basher to constitute MintPress as a for-profit, a regular news organization. She has a 3-year break-even plan based on advertising. And I don't know whether they changed their plan, but they still survive. So there's that. Muhawesh has investors, retired business people, whom, and that's enclosed in quotes, whom she will not name. Unfortunate for a journalism operation fighting alongside people seeking transparency. It is noted here. The site's About Us page is similarly skinny. Her father-in-law, Odeh A. Muhawesh, an adjunct St. Thomas theology professor and veteran Twin Cities businessman, is a key advisor. Still, everything we're doing now is my idea, Muhawesh says. I found the investors. Muhawesh says she got the idea for the online-only MintPress. Mint leaves are refreshing and invigorating. After her KARE internship, where she produced stories and online content for the 4 p.m. news, she began freelancing, and one of her clients, a Lebanese startup, began asking her for advice on pulling off an online site. She decided she had enough of a vision to do one herself. Muhawesh's early core of correspondence includes Joey LeMay, who left a copy editing job with Gannett Company's St. Cloud Times, ditching corporate bureaucracy for an independent news site where he can write national and international explainers really is my cup of tea. We're not trying to follow day-to-day news, compete with CNN, same old story. We want to provide more. One of LeMay's first stories focused on a 2007 speech by Rick Santorum, in which the Republican presidential candidate pushed to evangelize and eradicate parts of the Middle East and Islam because of what he called Islamofascism. It deserves focus, but it's interesting that even in 2012, they're going back to 2007. LeMay says the speech was remarkably inflammatory toward Islam. If Ron Paul's allegedly racist newsletters got so much coverage, we figured, why not this? Muhawish is a Muslim who adopted the hijab in college, in a nod to tradition and modesty. Although MintPress was inspired in part by Tahrir Square, Muhawish indicates it's the non-denominational aspects of that uprising, the OWS, Occupy Wall Street aspects, that guide MintPress. I don't bring Islam into my news programming, says the Maple Grove native, a daughter of Palestinian immigrants, in case you were wondering. Still, growing up in our Palestinian household, it was natural to know more about the world. Always in junior high, I knew what was going on in the world more than other students. If you understand U.S. international relations, you'll understand our policies. Well, okay, that's worth knowing. I mean, probably no surprise then that they would be covering what happened at the University of Minnesota through a pro-Palestinian lens. As Palestinians, that'll happen. MintPress's homepage reflects a site that pays attention to the Middle East but is not fixated on it. Staff bylines included reflections on Martin Luther King's legacy, Ron Paul's media coverage, and a possible recall of Montana congressman who backed the controversial National Defense Authorization Act. And this is back in 2012. Another Mint reporter, Janessa Schillmoller, that's probably close, examined whether the NDAA, which allows indefinite detentions without trial, that's what was going on in the NDAAs back then in 2012, without trial for U.S. citizens engaging in terrorism, could affect Occupy Wall Street. She interviewed the director of a site that has tracked 5,884 arrests and OWS's $40,000 a week bail needs. Schillmoller, a St. Kate's grad, has worked in international leadership programs and mentored students from around the globe. A third correspondent, Carissa Wyant, has reported for the Minneapolis-St. Paul Business Journal and KMSP-TV. Muhawish's brother-in-law, Muhammad, is a news producer. In the case of the Santorum story, there was no defense from the candidate or his campaign. There was also no pushback to the OWS claims. Muhawish does not claim objectivity. We want to fix the system, she says, adding, we want peace, not war, but says as the site departs its trial week, reporters will seek out authorities too. Okay. MintPress stories will increasingly displace licensed Associated Press content, and Muhawish plans to salt in veteran correspondence with the fairly young staffers currently filing. She says she got hundreds and hundreds of applications, some from locally recognizable names, even though MintPress will have no indication there's a Minnesota standpoint on anything. We are a national website based in Minnesota. Muhawish said she wound up hiring journalists not merely for skill, but for passion. Who went into journalism to make a difference? These are the people we will call back. So that's about their founding back in 2012. And I mentioned to you that, there's no way I don't think we're going to be able to get through this entire piece. Maybe ever, quite honestly. But did I archive this yesterday because I had already mentioned it? Well, I'll mention it again just so you know that it's there and can take a look. And perhaps we can include it again in today's roundup. This, fast forward another 12 years, and you are looking at the echo chamber of Syrian chemical weapons conspiracy theorists, as reported in, not 12 years ahead, but let's say 9 years ahead, because this is a 2021 piece. Brian Whitaker, remember, writing about the collection of non-mainstream bloggers who it is alleged in this article had been paid by murky organization to parrot Assad regime and Kremlin falsehoods. Just something to keep in mind here, that today's MintPress is among many lumped in with these accusations that they were somehow on the take to promote Assad regime and Kremlin falsehoods, denying the use of chemical weapons against the population of Syria in their uprising. Why Palestinians who became, I guess, refugees in Lebanon and then moved to the United States would be interested in, and who were entered journalism out of sympathy with the Arab Spring movement, would align themselves with Assad regime apologists. I have no idea, but it's been a strange journey for a lot of people over the past 12 years. So anyway, keep an eye out for all of this. This is a very complicated situation. And to make things worse, perhaps if we go back to this discussion at all in the balance of the week, we'll piss off even more people by pointing out that even the Palestinian view of the liberation of Palestine is not a monolithic view, and that West Bank Palestinians very often see things differently from Gazan Palestinians, and of course the political leadership in both places more or less rivals for leadership of the entirety of the Palestinian people, to the point where I say they're at each other's throats. Not only are they at each other's throats, they are very often literally cutting one another's throats as well. Not an easy situation to insert yourself into from a college campus.
From networksradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
So, let's see. You can insert yourself into the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy next here on Netroots Radio. Thanks to Justice Putnam bringing you his stories from around the country and around the world. A big court filing in Cannon's court today by Trump's lawyer, Chris Kise, now claims he is no longer free for the next 2 weeks, so she has to delay the trial by a lot.